the title of the message that's in the bulletin. We're moving through Mark's Gospel. I want to show you 3 focal points as we move along. We're moving through Mark's Gospel, focusing on, first, the focus is the individual stories that Mark's recorded for us. In other words, what is happening in this particular story? And secondly, what does it mean? The second underlying focus is that Jesus is training the 12. Jesus is training the 12 to take over when he's gone. Keep that in the back of your mind, because that's the underlying focus as we move through Mark. He's training the 12 to take over when he's gone. So as we're looking at a story and seeing what's happening in the story, there's a sense of the stories piling up. So I want to continue saying that the disciples have been trained because of this particular situation last week. It was a great storm. But every story that we move to is in the context of he's training the disciples. The stories stand alone, but he's training the disciples. So what does this story mean in the developmental progress that the disciples are making in the training process? Because it's just a year from now when we're going to hit Easter. Actually, we're going to hit Easter in 2 months. But it's a year from now in Bible time when we're going to hit Easter. And they don't know it. He'll be gone. Third, we who are gathered here this morning, we gladly confess that we're disciples of the Lord Jesus Christ. And we acknowledge we're living in a culture that is totally contrary to the kingdom culture that Jesus is presenting. We live in a culture that's, again, contrary to the kingdom culture that he has come to present. So, how do each of these stories apply in life, in our culture? Also, what does it practically mean in my life as we look at it? So today we move into Mark chapter 7, and it would be helpful if you have your Bible. I'm not showing it on because we're going to run through 30 verses, 1 through 30, and I mean run. I'm determined to once in my lifetime be done before 12 o'clock or quarter of 12. I'm not going to tell you when I'm be done unless I make it. We'll see. But that's why we're going to run through these. Setting the context, Mark 6, where we've just been, included Jesus returning to Nazareth with the disciples. And the hometown folks, Mark tells us, took offense at him. Took offense at him. I'm not going to explore that anymore, but it made me think. It probably meant, because the disciples probably had never been to Jesus' hometown, but it meant the disciples probably felt unaccepted there. Well, just after that high note of affirmation for the disciples and for Jesus, he sends the 12 out on their first ever mission trip, 2 by 2, without him. They've been walking with him at least a year and a half, but now they're going out without him. So we're looking at individual stories. The underlying focus being the training. How does it apply in our life, in our culture? Going out 2 by 2. Here comes a practical application. We now have a visitation team that's setting up a ministry to visit the sick and shut-ins of Hope Church. And any other persons that we get a name from you, and this visitation team ministry will visit them. We do not have 2 by 2 yet. In fact, 3 went out this week. to visit, to pray with, and to serve communion. They went out on Tuesday, and they went out again on Friday. And they served or visited in 5 different settings, prayed with, and then served communion. In my years, I've heard a few individuals say, and here it comes, I love ministering to elderly people. And I often respond, you do? I love ministering to elderly people. The truth is, I love hearing that because I genuinely believe for a believer, it's a calling. And that love is built in, is wired into that person and that personality by the Lord. Back in 85, when we were working at the college and our kids were Jan's freshman year, our daughter's freshman year, she got a job as a student in a home for retarded adults. Today, I think you have to say disabled adults. They were retarded and disabled adults. Jan loved the residents when she worked with them. In fact, when there was some talk that Louise might not be able to stay in the home because of the cost of being in that private residential home, there were 14 residents in the home where they stayed. Jan would sometimes use the 15-passenger van to bring them to basketball games at the college. One time Jan came, it was really cute. Jan came in and all the residents lined up in single file, and as Jan walks in the sideline and up into the bleachers, they're all walking like this, right behind her. And when Mom has been out with Jan at the Nanuet Mall and the residents, they come running to Jan and hug her. And and Louise, and Jan said, if Louise can't stay, I want to adopt her. Now, she lived with us at the time and at the residence hall, but she said, I would adopt Louise if I could. I love that. It's a reflection of who Jesus is in the heart of one. One night at a basketball game, another student came over to Jan and said, ooh, how can you be near those people? And Jan told us, I wanted to hit her. Because you're talking about people I love. That makes me cry. I'm so thrilled that Jesus would work that way in her life. And that's why the home only hired Nyack College and seminary students. There was something different about those students, he would say. Now, he didn't need the Lord because he was a very good man who gave home to disabled adults. So he didn't think he needed the Lord, but he liked hiring these students. There's something different about the way they treat his precious residents. I say all that to say, if you're one of those who just love ministering to adults, the visiting teams would invite you that you could, if you feel you have a heart for that kind of ministry, you can let us know, let the office know, write it on a green slip. They can perhaps grow to going out 2 by 2 and maybe going out 3 by 3 or 2 by 2 by 2. But I'm not saying you're sentenced to visit old people. The Lord will call those, and He's already equipped you with the way He's wired you, just in case. When the 12 returned from their 2x2 ministry, and again they were probably gone about 4 months, Jesus took them away for R&R in a retreat. There was the feeding of the 5 or the 10,000, 5,000 men, but of course there were women and children. Following the disciples in the training process, we don't know, I thought about it this week, we don't know any of the emotional atmosphere among the boys in this situation. Because they go away for R&R debriefing and the whole crowd follows them. But Jesus uses them to feed the 5 to 10,000. Now, you might say, I could never do that. I don't know how to do something like that. In fact, I could never organize that much food to feed 10,000? What did they, teenage disciples of Jesus, just back from working miracles and driving out demons, what did they do to serve the 10,000? One by one, they full of food, offering it not to the crowd. Please catch this. But one by one to each individual man, each individual woman, each individual child. Because you can't serve 10,000. But each disciple served one by one. Oh, I can't talk to people. You don't have to talk to them. Just offer them the food, Jesus, and it's a continuous supply. But what if they're not interested? I can't buttonhole people and talk to them, and I can't talk them into accepting Jesus. You don't have to. Just offer them the bread and fish given you to offer them. That guy over there, he said to me, don't give me any of that stuff. I don't believe in it. And I certainly don't believe it can satisfy one's inner. What am I supposed to do with him? And Jesus leans over and says, make him eat it. No, he doesn't tell him, make him eat it. Just pass him by. You don't have to. If he's not hungry, if he doesn't believe in the bread, let him be hungry. Just pass him by. Look, Jesus was not keeping score on how many, but he's delighted that you're willing to be a disciple and serve. He's not keeping score on which of the disciples is the best, who served the most. See, that's our culture. He's teaching different from our culture. Jesus isn't keeping score on which disciple is the best, who serves the most bread, who got the most people to take Jesus' possessions and not your belt as you get someone to take everything. And poor you only got, obviously you're not as important as serving in the adult sections. Anybody who gets to serve the adults is a lot more important than those who serve children. Right? What's the mental culture? The disciple here. Don't keep bothering the master with those kids. Hey. Oh, how the Father loves children. And when the disciples did that, he was indignant because that's not his heart. So what's the qualifier of being a faithful servant, a faithful disciple? Here's the qualifier. I can't do anything by my... Put my trust in Jesus. He's the provider. He's Jehovah Jireh. I merely go to offer what he has provided. And if that person doesn't want it, they're not rejecting. Please realize that. They're not rejecting you. They're rejecting food and provision for their inner self. And I don't have to. In fact, I can't make them eat it. Responsibility. So the focal point is, am I willing to serve him in an area I have a heart for? Or even if I don't have a heart necessarily for it, but I'm trusting him to provide the goods because I'm in and of myself. Now, interestingly, we do have a food distribution program. Isn't that interesting? And on the first Tuesday of the month, Jericho Roads provides about 40 or 50 bags of groceries. And so this Tuesday, beginning at 8:30, it's supposed to begin 9 to noon, but sometimes there's 10 people lined up waiting for groceries. And we do it, that distribution team does it in love and offers to pray for each person if there's something that the Lord loves it. Moving into chapter 7. It's a new subject, new issue, not necessarily, now watch this. It's not necessarily the next event that happened after the feeding of the 5,000 and the storm. By that I mean when we were in chapter, pointed it out, I never caught it myself, but that he was dealing with a series of conflict stories. And so it's a similar situation that we move into in chapter 7. That same commentator said this, "Know or where this incident took place." So as we progress along, you'll see, as we move through this morning, you'll see how these stories connect in context in the point of focus. Chapter 7, verse 1. The Pharisees and some gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating food with their hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. Here we have another delegation of fact-finding theologians who Jerusalem off the Mount Nebo there, Mount Moriah. They've come down off of Jerusalem and moved up into the Galilee, fact-finding team looking at the activities of Jesus. Their complaint was not that the disciples were not using the sanitizing gel that all of the food booths had put out there. You know, you could pump and sanitize your hands. That was not the issue. In fact, they had no concern about the matter of hygiene. That wasn't what it was. Very religious leaders had an entire division in the Mishnah explaining the teachings of the rabbi that was devoted to cleanliness. How to make sure that you are ceremonially clean. Now, because Mark is writing his gospel to Gentile readers, probably Romans, he felt it was necessary to explain this Jewish religious rule set that they're referring to. So verse 3, he gives, "The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders." And the NIV Study Bible said they had developed a whole section, pages and pages, unclean filth off of your hands. Here's some of the suggestions. You do it with a clenched fist of one hand rubbing the palm of the other. I'm guessing it was like this. And the second point was you do it up to your wrist, but if you're really spiritual, you'll do it all the way to your anyone else is. Or you do it with a handful of water cupped in your hand. They gave you instructions on how to do it. No running water, you realize. Okay, now realize, if it's about religious ceremony, being clean, then you have to give the specific details on how it's done to ensure that the cleansing really takes place. Specific details to make sure it takes according to your standard. Because you set the standard, see. And if you're a really strict rabbi, then you add a few more steps to the cleansing process. Verse 4. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. Now, this is particularly important because in the marketplace, you can't help but brush against a lousy, dirty dog Gentile. I mean, it's just a crowded marketplace. You're going to bump. You don't eat anything until you've cleansed the Gentile filth off your hands. Now, in our past cultural history, we would never have to do that because we were able to establish water fountains. See, then you didn't get dirty by drinking from a colored water fountain or going to the bathroom in a colored bathroom. Now we see the absurdity to be religious. He continues in 4, and they observe many other traditions, such as the washing of cups, pitchers, kettles, just a whole truckload of things. End of parenthesis. Okay. By that I mean, what's the hot issue that really concerns the Pharisees and teachers of the law about how Jesus' disciples just don't get it? What's the hot issue with them? Verse 5. So I'm going to add a little bit of tone of voice. There's no tone of voice markings in my Bible, but I don't say, why don't your disciples? I don't think they were like that. But they say to Jesus, why don't your disciples live according to the tradition with defiled hands? Now think, we know that the boys have just recently returned from their mission trip. Not with Jesus, by themselves, 2 by 2. They were doing miraculous healings, driving out evil spirits by the authority that Jesus had given them. He was elsewhere, but they had that authority. That's what they've been doing. But the focal point here is, why don't your and wash their hands the right way? Though their focus is pathetically shallow, in a sense, it's a good question for us to consider. Live by the tradition of the elders. Do you think Jesus' core focus is in the tradition of the elders? Tradition of the elders. Is Jesus trying to teach his disciples that they live above the teaching, the tradition of the elders? Jesus takes this negative, condemning question there focus back on them. Look at the next verse. You know, that's an interesting question you ask. Verse 6. Isaiah was right when he talked about you Pharisees and teachers of the law. I'm sure you all know well what is written by that great prophet of Jehovah. I want to stop a moment and look what's happening here. Here's this young rabbi, maybe 31 by this time. He half into his rabbi ministry, and he's telling them that Isaiah 700 years ago talked about them. You know, that goes over well. Saying anything, but you're saying Isaiah talked about us. Do tell. Now, take out your bulletin, please, because I want you to see at the top of the bulletin, what I put in there is the call. Is Isaiah chapter 29, verses 13 and 14. As I read to you from Mark, Jesus' quotes to them, look. Remember, Jesus said, Isaiah was right about you when he wrote, these people honor me with their lips and washing their hands and a lot of other outward religious stuff. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. See, for Jesus and his teaching to the disciples, it's a matter of the whole point is the heart of the servant, not the doings of the servant. Now, stop for a moment. I want you to notice there's another verse that I wrote there, but Jesus doesn't quote that one. You remember, you won't all remember because you weren't all here, but when we were talking about the way a rabbi trains his talmidim, his disciples, or the way he questions them to determine if he's going to accept them as a disciple, that a rabbi would use is called a remez. And a remez is this. There are only 2 states that border Florida. What is Georgia and Alabama? You don't answer the question, but you don't answer with the verse, but you give the verse before or after. That's the remez. Watch the next verse in your bulletin, which is unquoted. But there is this potential of ringing in their minds. He's already. There's that potential of it ringing in their mind if they have the text memorized, as was one of the requirements and what they did. They memorized it all. Looking at that verse 14. It is the therefore. What's it there for? Let me back up and say it, and then we go into it. Because you are such hypocrites, more concerned about than what they've been doing for the last 4 months. Look what they've been doing, miraculous healings, driving out demons, and you're saying, why don't you wash your hands the way we did? Because you're such hypocrites in This is Isaiah 29. Once more, I will astound these people with wonder upon wonder. The wisdom of the wise will perish, and the intelligence exposed. Now, Jesus didn't say that. But if they're quoting it in their head the way you were singing that song when Cheryl was playing it, they've just been nailed. Imperative answer to their question, why aren't your disciples as clean, washed, and religious as we are? Here's why, verse 8. You have let go of the commands of God, and you are holding on to human traditions. But you're holding on to traditions. And then he continues in what I like to think of as a comparative contrast illustration. And here I'm going to read real fast, just running down through 13. Here's what he says. You have a fine way of... See, Moses said, honor your father and mother. And he also said, anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. But you say, if anyone declares, Corban, there is now devoted to God, then you no longer let them. In fact, you set them free from doing anything for their father and mother. They're still religious because they've declared Corban. You nullify the Word of God by your tradition that you have handed down. And you do many, many other things like that. Now, I thought, because I looked up what's Corban. I thought, here's an example. Mom and Dad, I'm really sorry because I really would like to help you out. But this extra money that I have, I've designated it for the Great Commission Fund. Now, I really would like to help you in this great need that you have. But Mom and Dad, I'm sure you would agree that God than to giving it to you for an operation at your age. You ding-dong, don't add at your age. Leave that off anyway. Thought of another one when we were working at the college and some of the financial aid people, they told us, Alice in the post office, me, parents come in and they need financial aid for their kids. A financial report that they present. And they told us, one time a parent said, well, that is our income, but you don't understand, with the mortgage that we have on board to help our kid in college. This money's Corbaned for the needs. See what they do? To teach them truth in the context of the Pharisees' hypocrisy. Look at verse 14. Again, Jesus called the crowd to him and said, listen to me, every one of you, and understand this. Them by going into them. Rather, it is what comes out of the person that defiles. Dear friends, I was raised in a church where we never ate in the church because it's a sin to eat in the Presbyterians eat in their church. We don't. So if we're going to have a dinner, we go to the Presbyterian church to have the dinner, but we're not going to eat in our church. Or we go to the fire. True. That's what we did. We had someone leave our church because we started eating in the basement of the church. Okay? Now, Jesus is saying, no. Now, if you have your Bible open and it's an NIV translation, verse 16 reads, no, verse 16. Several years ago, someone left our church. Use the NIV translation, and the reason she did is because it's not the right Bible, because the NIV leaves verses out. So she had already gone through and checked everywhere where he left a verse out. If you'll look down at the footnote says better manuscripts do not have this verse added. It's a practical admonition. He who has eyes to see and ears to hear, let him hear and see. That's what verse 16 is. And what they're saying is that some of the more reliable manuscripts just don't have that verse in it. We really got to run faster. So we come to verse, we're skipping over verse 16, verse 17. After he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about this parable. And I'm assuming can defile someone by going into them. I can only imagine Jesus smiles and goes, verse 18. Nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them. For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach, and then out of the body. All foods clean. Does eating pork defile the body? Bacon, 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 bacon. Lobster, clams, crabs, bottom feeders. It may be unhealthful for your body to eat bottom feeders. See? Because it's a matter of the heart, not the stomach. Verse 20. So he went on. What comes out of a person is what defiles. That evil thoughts come. And then he goes on. Please literally hear what Jesus is saying. Here's what these evil murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. Can you imagine some kind, gentle, he has bacon for breakfast and pulled pork barbecue for lunch. And before dinner, he burglarizes his neighbor's house. Or he rapes and murders. answer is, it must have been the pork. It comes from the thought life. Come from inside the thought life, and it's the thought life that defiles the person. When I hit that point in my sermon prep, I then thought of several verses that relate to the thought life. In fact, verses in. When we ate breakfast, and Alice read to me Jesus Calling by Sarah Young, and then after that, we read Victorious Mindset by one of our students at Nyack, Sarah Lindbergh. Jesus Calling yesterday morning. Let me say it again, verse 23. All these evils come from inside the thought life. And it's the thought life that defiles the person. Whatever occupies your mind the most becomes your God. Worries, if indulged, develop into idols. Break free from this bondage by affirming your trust in me and refreshing yourself in my presence. What goes on in your mind is invisible, but I read your thoughts continually, searching for evidence of trust in me. I love that line. Think of that. Jesus saying, I read your thoughts continually. Turns to me. Guard your thoughts diligently. Good thought choices will keep you close to me. And then we turn to Sarah Lindbergh, and this is the verse. Above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. She says, lately God is reminding me to be focused on things that are eternal. This stuff down here on earth is really just a glimpse of what is to come. Me to set my heart on Him. Inside our hearts lie the intentions, the desires, the emotions, and the passions that drive us forward. Our happiness. The motivation to succeed in life begins at the core of our heart. God calls us to set the things in our hearts on Him. He calls us to align our emotions, our desires. Are we loving others like God loves them? Are we forgiving others like God forgives them? God has called us to a standard much more than this world can offer. I want the things of God that truly satisfy, the things that last, the things that can heal my heart and help me become more like Him. Verse 24. In fact, 9 minutes ago I passed that place. But I got to give this to you because this ending is awesome, unbelievable. Not because of me, because of Jesus. Wait till you see what Jesus... that place, wherever that place was, and went to the vicinity of Tyre. Different place, perhaps different time, but Mark has another story to tell you, and if I wait till next week to tell you the story, you'd miss the whole context. The context, he wants you to hear this story in the context. didn't want anybody to know it. Trouble was, he couldn't keep his presence secret. So here's what happened, verse 25. There was a woman in that vicinity whose little daughter was possessed of an evil spirit. As soon as she heard about Jesus, at his feet. Please notice what she did. Searched him out, came and fell at his feet. 26. The woman was a Greek, born in Syrian Phoenicia. Now, Syrian-born Greek. Well, Mark's setting the stage for what's coming. He had to point this out, particularly to the Gentile readers, that she is not a Jew. All right, contextual parallel. What's the parallel? What was the hot issue for the Pharisees? What's the hot issue that concerns this non-Jewish woman as she comes to this young And if he was any rabbi of class, he wouldn't let that non-Jewish woman talk to him. What's the hard issue for her? Permeates her mind, her being, her thinking. Nothing is more important, nothing is more imminent than the distress of her precious, precious daughter. So, remember I said we have to be aware of the setting that Mark is giving us, because if you're not aware of the setting, you're going to interpret this 180 degrees from where Jesus is. First, let the children eat all they want, for it's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. So much for that poor dear mother, and I almost started crying. She hears the healer, my Lord, dismiss the dogs. Why? Why do the Pharisees and teachers of the law have to wash their hands before they eat after coming in from the marketplace? Because they've been rubbing shoulders. Clean and defiled. Hey, what do you think the disciples are thinking when Jesus says that? Think they could possibly be thinking, this Syrian woman shouldn't even be talking to our rabbi. Who she thinks she is? From the heart. I'll tell you who she thinks she is. She's a mother with a broken heart. And in her heart, she believes that this young Jewish man that she's heard about, that he's and so she says, verse 28, oh, Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Whoa! For such a reply, oh my dear, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. Why? And this ought to be the end, but here comes the zinger. Ready? Get your bulletin out again. I want you to look at the bottom, the call to worship's at 9:18. In that day the deaf will hear the words of the scroll, and out of the gloom and darkness the eyes of the blind will see. Blessed are those who have eyes to see the truth. No, I'm going to read to you while you're looking at the bottom. The next verse in Mark is this. After the woman, Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre. A man who was deaf. And what do you think Jesus might do for that man when we get to that story? We're not going to do that story. Thank you to say. Thank you for not. Excuse me, chapter 28, verse 18. Same chapter. In that day, verse 18. What day? The day when at the top of the perish. The intelligence of the intelligent will vanish. In that day, the deaf will hear the words of the scroll. And out of gloom and darkness, the eyes of the blind will see. 19. The Holy One of Israel. My dear brothers and sisters, in our setting today, who might this humble, needy person be that Isaiah talked about 700 years on the bed, the demon gone? Do you think she was upset that he associated her with the dogs? I think when she walked in, I cried and hugged her and screamed, rejoicing in the Lord. This humble woman rejoicing in the Lord, this dear needy mother. Oh my goodness, there I am at 5 of 12 again. Let me just, doggone. I was determined since Monday. No, so that's Sunday afternoon. And teachers of the law were rejoicing in the Lord. Why? Because where was their heart? It's a heart in the Lord. No, because he spends his thought life trying to find ways to prove that Jesus is not who he says he is. Rejoices in the Lord because she met the Holy One of Israel. And he is Lord, the Holy